Very interesting move yesterday with the president, hours after the announcement about Bob Woodward's book and the excerpt hit the news, was releasing an additional list of names of 20 people to his potential Supreme Court nominees.
That is why today I am announcing 20 additions to my original list of candidates for the United States Supreme Court. Should there be another vacancy on the Supreme Court during my presidency, my nominee will come from the names I have shared with the American public, including the original list and these 20 additions.
So really interesting there. If we break down some of the 20 additions, let's throw that up there on the screen of all 20. They actually included some names that many of you might be familiar, including Senators Ted Cruz, Senator Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Daniel Cameron. He's that first African-American Attorney General of the state of Kentucky, rising Republican star. The rest of them, it was kind of a mixed bag. Overall, though, Krystal, the reason I wanted to focus on this is it's not the shot in the arm that it was in 2016. I cannot overstate how critical the Supreme Court and Mike Pence was to Donald Trump's election. And I know a lot of lefties don't really get it because abortion is not something that drives a lot of their voting. However, for this critical coalition, it is. Having those vetted names, that was another key part, and why I think this list is a little bit distinguishing from that, is that those were serious legal people, vetted by the Federalist Society. They said, these are social conservatives, these are the ones you can rely upon. Some of that ended up not being true whenever they actually got put onto the bench. But nonetheless, in 2016, a large voting bloc of the Republican Party, maybe 16, 17% of the population, could say, we can vote for Trump with confidence that we will get what we want. Now, this time around, and we covered it at the time, in the aftermath of the Bostock case, in the aftermath of, I think, of the June medical case of not ruling in or taking an opportunity to try and strike a victory for a pro-life cause, and also with the ruling on the Bostock case, which is the transgender ruling there is some undermined faith in the evangelical community. And at the same time, this list is not necessarily meant to throw anything to that crowd, so to speak.
Right.
As I understand it, this, according to some experts I've spoken to, a lot of it is it's kind of like corporate lists. There's the former chief counsel for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce who's on the list.
Good stuff.
There are a lot of people there very well known in the kind of corporate Federalist Society circles here in Washington, D.C. Not to say that there aren't some good people that were on there. And really, I think the most important way to look at it was the inclusion of Hawley, Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, and Daniel Cameron.
Yeah.
It was almost like a rising stars type thing. And actually, it was like a way to signal to the base, be like,
right.
These are some of the rising stars in the Republican Party. I thought that actually was probably the most interesting thing about it, was sending a signal to the base of these are the people who you like, and so we're putting them on the list too.
Hawley was an interesting inclusion because he was left out of the RNC, which is like the logical place.
Most critical, actually, of Trump's legal nominees. I mean, he's held up several of their nominees for suspect reasons.
That's true. That is a very good point. But, you would think that the place where you'd feature like the rising stars would be at the RNC, and he was a notable absence from that convention. So it almost feels like, a way to sort of throw a bone without any intention of actually following through, putting him on the court. And Hawley has already said,
he's like, I'm
good to go. Thanks. I'm sure he wants to ultimately be president is his goal.
Yeah.
No, it is interesting to think back to the different dynamic in 2016, because at that time, there was real nervousness about,
especially in the
evangelical community, about whether Trump was really with them. He previously donated to Planned Parenthood. It seemed like he had been on the other side of abortion. He clearly doesn't have a lot of facility or deep knowledge of the Bible. He's not a church-going person. His own personal life, doesn't exactly match the way of living that they all, claim to ascribe to. And so the pick of Pence, oftentimes vice presidential nominees really don't make that much of a difference. Pence was a very strategic choice. And so he was assigned that, no, I'm going to be with you. I'm committed to this.
Right.
And added to that, the list of Supreme Court nominees. And that was the thing that really locked people in. This time around, look, the white evangelical community has been his most solid base throughout his entire presidency.
His support is actually up from 2016. He's got an 83% approval rate.
So I think part of what was the secret sauce in 2016 was the overwhelming enthusiasm for him. And I think what you're pointing to here is not that they're leaving him, but some of that excitement may have waned, because ultimately this multi-decade strategy of basically saying, like, look, we see the culture is going in this direction with issues like gay marriage. It's like an overwhelmingly, popular now part of American society. Very little controversy at the federal level. Politicians aren't going to touch it because it's so unpopular for them to be opposed to it. So they're like, we're going to use this undemocratic institution as a bulwark against societal change. And with these cases, you kind of realize that wherever you stand on that issue, obviously I'm very much in support of gay marriage and have been as long as I knew about it. But regardless of where you stand on the issue, that's not going to be an effective strategy, because the court moves with public opinion ultimately, and that's part of what we saw in this session.
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of people. Well, it's complicated because these things aren't necessarily the public opinion the way that it's spun sometimes. However, what I think really it is that on the Federalist Society piece, the reason why the court may not look, it still matters immensely, but the reason why is there's not that open seat. Right? Like, that was the thing. McConnell keeping Merrick Garland's seat, or that Merrick Garland rejecting that nomination, keeping Scalia's seat open, that was a matter of life and death for a lot of evangelicals.
They're all salivating over RBG, though.
Of course.
Watching every bit of health news and
at the end of the day, she's still alive. And so, like, that fact that open seat was there was such an important driver for the evangelical, and for a lot of Republicans, actually, who came in and said, at the end of the day, I got to pull this lever for the court. I don't know if they're going to justify it around this time around. I do think overall that the court list is not nearly as important as it was then, and it's also interesting to view it within the lens of, hey, this is another area where these judicial nominees, just like most of the course of the Trump's presidency, was largely co-opted and put on by more establishment types who don't actually care much about social conservatism and who care a lot more about making sure pipelines get built in the United States.
Yeah, the chamber got all their justices.
Well, now they literally
perfectly
have
happy.
Former counsel who is on the list, which is something they could never have dreamed of in earlier years. So there you go.
There you go. Well, more rising for you after this.